Good evening. Can you hear me? Good. Today we are celebrating the transfiguration of Jesus Christ. Last week we heard in the gospel the temptation of Christ. Today, transfiguration, from temptation to transfiguration. And what can we learn from all of these readings that we heard this past week and today? If you make a mistake, or if you made a sin or something, if you don't learn anything about it, that's not transfiguration. The word transfiguration comes from the Greek word metamorph, which means change from within, from inside to outside. So Jesus' appearance changed into light, and it is teaching that Christ revealed himself not just as a human person, but as God, divinity and humanity. And the response of the apostles, there are three of them, with Jesus, especially with Peter, it was fear. Peter was terrified. The appearance of God during that time was terrifying, that he did not know what to do except saying, "Can we build some tents here for you, for Moses, and for Elijah?" Which gives another layer of this gospel. In this particular gospel, the Old Testament meets the New Testament. The prophets, Moses, Elijah from the Old Testament, and the three disciples of Christ, James, John, and Peter, from the New Testament. And where is Christ? Christ is in the middle. Past, present, and future. And we can learn from all of these things. The transfiguration, it's about relationship. Christ builds relationship here on earth, and for us to learn that, Lent is about relationship. That's why Lent, we come back to the basic, or we go back to the basics. Fasting, prayer, service. We're stripped of our sinfulness, but back to where we are as child or children of God. And then, the image of God in the Old Testament, in the first reading, when Abraham sacrificed Isaac, it was absurd. Why is God telling Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, the only child? It's so absurd that why is God is asking this? And I read that this is about not the test, but the generosity of God Himself, or God Himself, and also, think about this. Isaac being sacrificed did not say a word, except, "I have to accept this." The generosity of Yahweh, the generosity of Abraham, the generosity of Isaac, which also mirrored to the generosity of Christ dying on the cross. The image of God is about generosity. And last week, I went to a prayer breakfast here in South Pasadena, and Father Greg Boyle was the speaker. But there is a word that stuck with me, or a line that stuck with me, and he shared his story that he was in a juvenile center doing a prayer or mass, and the psalm said, "God is exalted," but it was misread by the person reading it. And the person said, "God is exhausted." It stuck with me because Father Boyle said, God is exhausted, which means God is generous. Think about this. I've been thinking about it this week. If you have a family, you're a parent, if you're exalted, guess what? God is telling you, you are generous, like what Father Greg Boyle said. Being exhausted is not a bad idea. and which means the image of God going up in the mountains to be transfigured. Maybe that's a time for Christ not to be transfigured, but also to rest. So whatever you're exhausted about in life, spiritual life, offer them to God today or this week, whatever it is, illnesses, relationships. And I learned this, transfiguration is also about prayer. I learned this in life. If prayer doesn't change you to become a better person, I think it's better for us to change the prayer. I'm going to stop, think about what I just said, and I will repeat it. If our prayer doesn't change us to be a better person, I think it's better for us to change the prayer right now and find what fits for us. Because as Christians, we are called to be a better person every day. And the image that we have in life changes. I'm going to share you a little story. 2 weeks ago, I was in the valley helping out in a mass for little people, little children, hearing confession for the first time. And Los Angeles is a big city. Someone in the congregation recognized me. And he said, "Do you remember me?" In my brain's telling me I could not even remember what I ate this morning. How come I will remember you? And this person, we went to high school together. His child is being will receive First Communion and heard the first reconciliation service that time. And he said to me, "I did not realize, when did you become a father as a priest? And what happened to you?" I laughed and I thought about this driving home from the valley to here. His image of Marlon Mateo in his head did not change until he saw me wearing robes. And I said to myself, hopefully that image stays in his mind. That's it. We have an image that we created, that we project in all our lifetime. When we were younger, what is your image of yourself? When we were younger, what is the image of God? What is your image of God now? Hopefully, your idea or your image of yourself and God is transfigured. It's changed or changing, because the more we age, the more we become closer to the image of God that is compassionate and loving and welcomes us. If your image of God still bearded and wearing white robes, hey, I think it's time for us to look at what is God in our lives and who is God in our life. And the promise is the Holy Spirit gave the answer to Peter when he was terrified about the appearance of God. The Holy Spirit said, "This is my son," or "This is my beloved son. Listen to him." And that will be our image in our head for the rest of our lives. Because when we see God face to face, we don't have to worry, because we are created in the image and likeness of God. Nothing to fear, because God that we know right now is the God who is loving, compassionate, and merciful. So whatever you need this week, whatever you're carrying this week, whatever stress that you have or image that not good this week, bring them all up to the altar of the Lord, because you will hear in your prayer, hopefully this week, we are the beloved children, the sons and daughters of God. Listen to one another. God is here. Thank you.